morning, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I declare open the 408th meeting of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. The provisional agenda for this meeting has been distributed by the Secretariat for your consideration. Do I have any input on the agenda? Any questions? I see no objections or no request for the floor. The agenda is adopted. Before we start, allow me on behalf of the committee to welcome and express my gratitude to all members and observers of the committee for their efforts, and to Ms. Gréta Gunnarsdottir, Director of the UNRWRA Representative Office, New York, for accepting our invitation and for coming to brief the committee. Allow me to also congratulate those who have taken up their posts as permanent representatives to the United Nations here at headquarters since the last committee meeting in July 2022. Here I would like to single out or to list Her Excellency Ms. Ruchira Kamboj as permanent representative of India, His Excellency Mr. Tariq Al-Banai as permanent representative of Kuwait, His Excellency Mr. Abdul Aziz Mohammed O Al-Wasil as permanent representative of Saudi Arabia. We trust that our new colleagues will contribute fully in the work of the committee, and we welcome them and wish them success in their respective responsibilities. Distinguished delegates, I present agenda item 2, which is an update by the Permanent Observer Mission of the State of Palestine. As usual, we will start our meeting with this update from the Mission of Palestine, and I would now like to give the floor to Ambassador Feda Abdelhadi Nasser to provide an update on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, as well as on other diplomatic developments. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all ambassadors and delegates present in today's meeting. I would like to begin by extending the apologies of Minister Mansour, who could not attend our meeting today due to delays in his return travel to New York. We are thankful to the Chair, the Bureau members, and the committee as a whole for their recent activities in support of Palestine, including the statement delivered in July at the open debate of the Security Council and the Bureau's important meeting with the Secretary General last week, and we look forward to the Chair's briefing in this regard. Regrettably, since the committee met last early July, the situation in occupied Palestine, including East Jerusalem, has continued to deteriorate. Israel, the occupying power, is escalating all of its violations and human rights abuses against our people. And we have tried to document this in our letters to the Security Council and the General Assembly and the Secretary General regularly. In recent weeks, this was starkly evident in yet another criminal Israeli military assault on the besieged Palestinian civilian population in the Gaza Strip, which resulted in the killing of 49 Palestinians, among them 17 children and 4 women, terrorizing and devastating so many more families. These attacks also wreaked more destruction on Gaza, which has not yet recovered from past Israeli military aggressions, adding to the thousands who remain displaced and exacerbating the dire humanitarian conditions caused by Israel's illegal 15-year blockade of Gaza. And it has also been evident in the daily and continual Israeli military raids and acts of repression and persecution against Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Every single day, violence is being perpetrated by the occupying forces, including armed settlers and extremist settler militias, resulting in the killing, injury, and maiming of Palestinians, including children and women. As of this date, at least 85 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank this year, as occupying forces continue to violently raid cities, towns, villages, and camps, forcibly entering homes and attacking anyone who protests against this illegal occupation. And it is also evident in the daily arbitrary arrests and detention of Palestinians, with over 4,500 Palestinians currently being held in Israeli jails, suffering the inhumanity of captivity, including hundreds that are being held under administrative detention without charge. And this deterioration is also continuing in the daily destruction of Palestinian homes and properties and in the forced displacement of Palestinian families from their homes and lands, especially in and around East Jerusalem and Al-Khalil, including in Masafir Yatta and Sheikh Jarrah, Silwan, Al-Walaja, Al-Aisawiya, and elsewhere. And in the continuous construction of Israeli settlements and so-called outposts and military installations on our occupied land. And it is also evident in the daily provocations and acts of incitement against our people and against our holy sites, particularly at Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram al-Sharif, which continues to be targeted by Jewish extremists. Over this past weekend, the incitement and provocations of extremists escalated as they again raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, entering for the first time the compound since the occupation began in 1967 through the Lion's Gate, which is the entry for Muslim worshippers, and performing religious rituals that are prohibited under the historic and legal status quo. Further inflaming this situation, they and their supporters, including Israeli officials and members of the Knesset, boasted about this breach of Al-Haram al-Sharif and the trampling of Jordan's custodianship of the holy sites in Jerusalem. The continuation of such illegal and provocative actions, as we have warned repeatedly, threaten to ignite a religious war with disastrous consequences if not ceased. At the same time, Mr. Chair, Israel has intensified its attacks on Palestinian civil society, as witnessed in the recent raids of the premises of 7 Palestinian human rights and humanitarian organizations. Following its designation of 6 of these organizations as terror organizations, Israeli soldiers broke into their offices, destroying furniture and equipment and seizing files, and later summoning representatives for interrogation, threatening them with imprisonment should they continue their work. It should be noted that the targeted organizations work to support Palestinian women, children, farmers, prisoners, and to advocate for the human rights and well-being of our people. As stressed today in a statement by the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Israel is increasingly limiting human rights, quote, eyes and ears on the ground, end quote, with its expulsions and restrictions and prohibition on human rights monitors in occupied Palestine. We are grateful to this committee for its long-standing support to and partnership with Palestinian civil society, and to the many states that have dismissed Israel's appalling allegations and actions and affirmed their continued support, including funding, for the important work of these organizations. And we urge states to demand that Israel cease its harassment, intimidation, and assaults against Palestinian civil society and rescind the terror designations against them or bear the consequences for such illegal actions. Mr. Chair, delegates, I must also highlight today the deplorable situation of our political prisoners, among them children, who are being cruelly held captive by Israel, which is flagrantly violating their rights, including by acts of physical and psychological mistreatment amounting to torture and collective punishment prohibited by international law. In particular, I draw attention to the critical condition of Khalil Awauda, a 40-year-old Palestinian man who has been on hunger strike for 171 days in protest of his unlawful incarceration by Israel without trial or any charge. Khalil is emaciated and his family fears for his life, but he refuses to end his hunger strike, insisting on his innocence and demanding his freedom. What is happening to Khalil and thousands of other Palestinian prisoners and to the millions of Palestinians under Israel's colonial occupation and apartheid regime is not normal and cannot be justified under any circumstances, although regrettably many try to do both. No one should have to live this way, and it is illegal, amounting to grave breaches of international law, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So today, Mr. Chair, we reiterate to the committee members and observers our appeal for accountability for Israel's crimes against the Palestinian people and for their protection until this illegal occupation and subjugation of our people are brought to an end. We urge all to uphold their responsibilities in this regard in accordance with international law and the relevant General Assembly and Security Council resolutions. The international community has many legitimate, nonviolent, effective tools at its disposal, and it should use them to pressure Israel in the face of its blatant noncompliance. Only if the occupation is made more costly can we usher its end, as opposed to the reality all these years of a cost-free occupation from which Israel only reaps benefits and is continuously accorded privileges in the international community, including in this organization, rather than being held responsible for its violations. Mr. Chair, that brings me to another matter, and that is the deprivation of Palestine from its rightful place among the community of nations as it continues to be denied admission to full membership in the UN. This denial continues despite Israel's admittance over 7 decades ago, even as it has deliberately obstructed the exercise of Palestinian rights for nearly 75 years since the Nakba, particularly the right of Palestine refugees to return, and even as it has brutally oppressed the Palestinian people under its illegal foreign occupation for over 55 years. We believe there can be no justification for the continued exclusion of Palestine, and the Palestinian leadership has therefore decided to move forward with its application for admission to UN membership, which was submitted in September of 2011. We seek the support of the committee, including those who are members of the Security Council and have a pivotal role to play in this regard. This initiative, we stress, is in line with the committee's historic role in seeking justice for the Palestinian people and in supporting the struggle to attain their inalienable rights, including to self-determination and independence. We believe Palestine's admission to UN membership is wholly consistent with the two-state solution and is imperative for preserving it until a viable political process is launched to end the occupation. It would reinforce also the international community's long-held position that it does not recognize as legitimate Israeli sovereignty in any part of the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, including East Jerusalem, as reaffirmed by the Security Council in Resolution 2334. This is also consistent with the rejection of and the prohibition of the acquisition of territory by force. We've waited 11 years since first submitting our application for membership and 10 years since attaining observer status. And while fully aware of the U.S. position in the Security Council, our appeal is for them not to obstruct Palestine's admission to UN membership and to preserve the two-state solution until it can be realized. It is our hope that this effort can break the paralysis in the Security Council and inject momentum to counter Israel's violations and ultimately open a horizon towards a just solution. In the meantime, we will continue to seek all legitimate means to hold Israel accountable for its crimes, to deter its crimes, to protect our people, and to ensure the humanitarian assistance they need to alleviate their hardships under occupation and in exile. We therefore also appeal today again for the necessary political and financial support to UNRWRA to ensure the well-being and dignity of the Palestine refugees until a just solution to their plight is found on the basis of Resolution 194. And Mr. Chair, I will end there, looking forward to the briefing we will hear today by UNRWRA Representative Ambassador Gréta Gunnarsdottir on the situation of the refugees and the agency's needs at this critical moment. I thank you and the Bureau members and all members and observers of the committee and, of course, also the Division for Palestinian Rights. Thank you, Chair.
I thank Ambassador Feder for this update. Indeed, a dark picture that she is presenting to the committee this morning. But I would like to open the floor for comments and questions, if there are any from the floor. Please indicate if you wish to take the floor on the report presented by Ambassador Feder. I see no request at this stage. I know we will get to an opportunity later on to speak on in our national capacities on other issues. Perhaps at that point you may wish to reflect on the report. If there are no requests for the floor, I will move to the next agenda item. And in this case, it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Gréta Gunnarsdottir, the Director of UNRWRA Representative Office in New York, to join me at the podium for her to present us a briefing on the work of UNRWRA. Madame Gunnarsdottir, welcome.
Thank you, Ambassador. Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to express my deep appreciation to the committee for providing this opportunity to brief you on UNRWRA, and it's a great pleasure to be here. I want to just, because I do not know how familiar all of you are with UNRWRA, so I'll just touch upon some basics in the beginning, and then I will go onwards to the situation on the ground. So UNRWRA is an agency that has been operating for over 70 years, and we are providing direct services, and that's very important to note that we are providing direct services. It's on human development and humanitarian services to Palestine refugees. And this consists of education, both primary and vocational, primary health care, relief and social services, infrastructure and camp improvement, microfinance and emergency response, including in the situation of armed conflict. We have 5.7 million Palestine refugees registered and covered by our protection mandate. We have approximately 540,000 students in our 700 schools. We provide healthcare services to almost 3 million refugees through our primary healthcare centers, which are 143. And we provide social safety net to those that are in the biggest need, and those are about 400,000 people. Now, we are operating, we call them our fields of operation in Gaza, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Currently, we have crisis in all of these fields of operations, except for Jordan. And I'm just going to touch upon each field with Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Syria. And starting with Gaza, Mr. Chair, the security situation in Gaza remains highly volatile. Recent escalation since, in a way, this recent escalation, of course, and since May 2021. In Gaza, we always have to be prepared for the escalation of conflict, our staff. During active hostilities, our schools become the only place where displaced persons can flee to for safety, because, as we all know, they cannot flee from the Strip. Our field director in Gaza, when he was here in June, he said that this was the only place of conflict where he had worked, where people didn't have anywhere to go if there was a breakout of active conflict. But this constant preparation means also that we must have food and other basic readily available to change the schools overnight from places of learning to shelters. This also means that our staff has to be ready to change their job description from being, for example, a school principal today and overnight to take on the responsibility to run a shelter for hundreds and sometimes thousands of people. Now, the impact of increasing prices of commodities in Gaza has made people extremely reliant on UNRWA, with widespread poverty, with about 80% of the population living below the national poverty line. We are seeing continued price increases along with currency devaluation impact our ability to respond to the increased needs. The cost of UNRWA's quarterly food basket has increased by 42% since the end of 2021, and this comes on top of price increases in that year due to COVID mainly then. Now, as we have already heard from Her Excellency Ambassador Abdelhadi, the situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, remains incredibly tense and volatile. The situation in refugee camps has significantly worsened in 2022, with nearly all conflict-related indicators pointing to record high levels of violence. The situation on the ground, the security situation, has severely restricted UNRWA's operations, for example, due to access restrictions, for example, due to road closures, and we have also been affected by tear gas firing incidents. If I go on to Lebanon, Lebanon is confronted with multiple crises, including inflation exceeding 80%. The situation is becoming more critical, with bread and fuel shortages expected to continue, and the rising cost of living, including for transportation and telecommunications, expected to affect the access of refugees to agency services. This is, for example, because people have to take buses to access services. The levels of poverty, unemployment, and desperation are rising among Palestinian refugees faster than UNRWA's ability to provide services. UNRWA more than ever remains the lifeline for much of the Palestinian refugee community in Lebanon, who have limited access to public service due to their legal status in the country. For example, they have restricted access to a lot of professions. Now, if we move to Syria, over 11 years into the conflict, Palestinian refugees are among the most vulnerable populations in Syria. 83% of Palestinian refugees are living on less than $2 per person per day, including with the cash assistance provided by UNRWA. 40% remain in protracted displacement. Funding is needed for emergency cash assistance, food assistance, and rehabilitation of UNRWA facilities, and resumption of services inside the destroyed Yarmouk and Ain al-Tal camps, the camps that were the most heavily damaged by the conflict. For those families who have returned to the camps, UNRWA is providing mobile health clinics and transportation for students to go to the nearest UNRWA schools. Now, Mr. Chair, if I turn to another subject, which is our mandate renewal, I just wanted to use this opportunity because our mandate, which is renewed every 3 years by the General Assembly, last in 2019 by overwhelming support by member states, is coming up for renewal now in the autumn, and discussions might start in the 4th committee in October already. UNRWA Commissioner General will brief the committee in early November, and the vote will take place in November in the 4th committee, to be followed by a vote in plenary. We would like to emphasize the importance of strong political support from the member states for the mandate, And in this case, I also want to just call your attention to that when we talk about hopelessness and despair in our camps, there is this feeling among Palestinian refugees that they have been abandoned by the international community, and providing a strong mandate with a strong mandate from the General Assembly would send a strong signal to the Palestinian refugees that the international community still supports their access to the services from UNRWRA until there is a just and lasting solution to their plight, as the General Assembly has consistently committed to through decades. Now, I want to also touch a bit upon our financial situation because the program budget is our core budget. That is the budget that keeps our schools going, our health centers running, and the social services. And this is the third year in a row when we are approaching autumn that we are foreseeing that we might have a problem with paying salaries to our 20,000 plus staff. The teachers and the doctors and the nurses that provide education to our students and primary health care to the refugees that so need. And this year, because last year we carried over $62 million US, before that $75 million US. Now we are foreseeing that we will have a cash flow already in October, November, and to have challenges to pay the salaries. We also foresee a funding gap of 100 million plus on our program budget this year. The situation is so serious that the Commissioner General is referring to it as an existential threat to the agency, as some of you might recall from his statement in the Security Council last week. If we don't pay the salaries, we put our whole operations at risk, an investment that the UN has been investing in for decades. And this includes the education for over 500,000 kids, of course. And it also would seriously affect the livelihoods of our 28,000 staff and their numerous, and I underline numerous, dependent. This also carries a risk for stability in a volatile region, given that the predictability of our services is the major aspect of the agency's contribution to stability. So we are calling on increase in financial contributions from member states for early disbursement of pledges already made, and for end of the year additional top-ups where possible to get us through this year. And I want to mention that no amount is too small. We are also hoping that member states will be willing to look at options for more sustainable funding for UNRWRA, in line with the Secretary General's report from 2017, rather than having the modality that we have at the moment, which is almost entirely voluntary. Now, Mr. Chair, these insights into the situation in our fields of operations are mostly bleak, and also our financial situation. But I do want, however, to end on a positive note, because UNRWRA is, after all, a human development success story and has consistently proven for over 70 years that it works. We have tons of successful human development stories to back that up. We have a former UNRWA student from Syria, Novras, working on a COVID vaccination project in Vienna. A former UNRWA student from Gaza, Loay, being a successful engineer at NASA. Another student from Gaza, Bara, searching for a cure for pancreatic cancer in Barcelona. And the student who reached the highest grade at the national exam in Syria this year is Rama from Yarmouk refugee camp, who succeeded despite prolonged displacement and repeated power cuts. I also want to call your attention to an IT hub, an information technology hub that we have in Gaza, providing employment for 120 young women and men who are providing efficient IT solutions across the agency's 5 fields of operations, as well as to UN agencies worldwide. It is the largest IT employer in Gaza. Finally, our staff, despite all the challenges, they continue to be dedicated to providing services to Palestinian refugees, and in addition, they maintain their vision, innovation, and determination to constantly seek ways to improve our services and do better. This was reflected in how quickly and efficiently the agency reverted to distance learning, for example, for our students during the pandemic, and to telemedicine for those seeking primary health care also during the pandemic. And I also want to mention 2 principals in our vocational training centers in Gaza and Lebanon, whom I met during my field visits, who are both aspiring to make solar energy becoming a permanent feature of their curricula. This indicates ambition for the students, as well as identifying professions that are good fit for the needs in their fields of operations. Because if we look at Lebanon and Gaza, those are 2 fields where electricity is a huge problem. So this is, in a way, if they succeed in making this a part of the curricula, this is a good employment opportunity for the students and, as I said, a good fit for the field. So, of course, these kind of ideas call for additional funding, but I hope funding will materialize. And I put this here with you for consideration. And this is all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank Ms. Gunnarsdottir for her briefing. And as you could tell, distinguished colleagues, we have heard 2 briefings this morning that really depict a very deplorable situation faced by the people of Palestine. We live in troubled times marked by increasing incidences of suffering of people in so many conflict situations, and we are at risk of seeing resources earmarked to relief efforts to the vulnerable people in Palestine compete with resources going to other horrible situations. There is an urgent need for us to mobilize the necessary political support and financial support for the work, incredible work that UNRWA is doing. I would like to reaffirm the support of the committee to the work of your agency on behalf of Palestinian refugees. Your work is a pillar of peace and stability in the region and should continue until a just and equitable resolution of the refugee issue is reached. Distinguished delegates, I would like to open the floor for comments. Ambassador of Sri Lanka, you have the floor, sir.
To tell all those who are present here that what the director of UNRWRA in New York, Gréta, did explain to us clearly was seen with my own eyes when I had the privilege of visiting Jordan just in the month of July. And I had a special committee of Israeli practices on occupied Arab territories. And the special committee received briefings from UNRWRA at the agency headquarters in Amman and at the Maka refugee camp for Gazan refugees. Although UNRWRA faces, no doubt, dire financial situation and an almost US $120 million program budget shortfall, the agency continues to deliver above and beyond all expectations. So I can congratulate them for probably doing what they're doing. And is sustained by a dedicated cadre of staff, many of whom benefited from UNRWA's relief program itself. And that was a laudable feature, Chair. And the UNRWA relief, social, health, and education services as children. So really, it is an understatement, perhaps, to say that UNRWA urgently requires predictable and sustainable funding in order to continue to fulfill its critical role for Palestinian refugees and regional stability. Health and education services in particular are not sustainable on an ad hoc or emergency funding basis. And I don't think any pains need to be spared, really, in providing UNRWA with the necessary finances. And it deserves it in full measure. And I can confirm that. Thank you.
Thanks the distinguished permanent representative of Sri Lanka. And I now give the floor to distinguished permanent representative of Indonesia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Let me firstly thank Ambassador Freda Abdul Hadi and Madam Gréta Gunnarsdottir for the updates and the briefing. As you rightly said, Chair, the message is clear. UNRWA needs political and financial support sooner rather than later. For many Palestinians in the region, UNRWA may be the only option to continue to survive. So Indonesia reaffirms its full commitment to support UNRWA and call on all the members of this committee to do likewise. We also urge member states to increase their commitment and realize their contribution to UNRWA. On the other side of the coin, let me also commend UNRWA for its professionalism and dedication for its work. It is imperative to maintain accountability and effectiveness in carrying out such tasks. Mr. Chair, as important as the role of UNRWA may be, we should always put focus on the main task that we have, that is a lasting peace for the Palestinian people. Ambassador Freda has provided a very grim picture of the current situation on the ground. Without a clear and concrete progress in achieving the two-state solution, the root of the problem will persist. The Palestinian people will continue to face violence, displacement, as well as denial of its rights. This is very close to a situation that we faced many years back when many refers to very close to a situation of apartheid. Therefore, we reiterate our solidarity to the Palestinian people and we urge concrete action towards Israel to stop the illegal policy and practice that threaten the daily life of the Palestinian people and undermine the future peace of the process, future peace process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador of Indonesia. I recognize now the Ambassador Freda of Palestine. You want the floor again? Sure.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to also join the ambassadors of Sri Lanka and Indonesia in thanking Ms. Gréta Gunnarsdottir for her briefing to the committee on the current status of UNRWA's financial needs and primarily, of course, the needs of the Palestine refugees. Of course, we echo your call for the strongest possible political support for the mandate renewal, and I think that the members of this committee can play an important role in making appeals for that support as we near the voting in the fall, and helping us to get all of our partners from the various regions to throw their political support to UNRWA, but also as we are talking about these troubled times and the rising needs, and of course all vulnerable people around the world need support, I also would point to the remarks just made in the sense of UNRWA having to rely solely on voluntary contributions to provide this absolutely essential assistance to Palestine refugees, and that perhaps it is time to reconsider, in light of the recurrent funding crisis and the continued carryover of deficits that the agency is facing, different remedies. And in 2017, there had been, on the basis of the Secretary General's report, an initiative to seek a larger contribution from the UN regular budget to UNRWA for essential operating costs. And we believe that that initiative is worth revisiting. And we know that the members of this committee were very active in supporting that initiative in 2017, which was unfortunately suspended in the very difficult political climate we faced at the time with the Trump administration in particular in the United States at the time. But I think that there was much merit to that initiative. And again, the members of this committee and in wider configurations in the UN system were very supportive of it. And perhaps these are solutions that we can look into in these circumstances. And again, I think that the responsibility and the partnership that this committee has shown towards UNRWA over all of these years in advocating for support to UNRWA, for solidarity with the Palestine refugees, is something that we hope that this committee will continue to do in trying to forge a way forward together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador Fena. I recognize now the permanent representative from Cuba. You have the floor.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. Allow me first of all to express gratitude for the briefings by the Ambassador of the State of Palestine and Ms. Gréta Gunnarsdottir, Director of UNRWRA in New York. Regarding the presentation by the Ambassador, my delegation would like to reiterate our concern regarding the political attempts and the attitude of Israel towards occupied territory. We need to act decisively to bring an end to Israeli military activities, particularly in the Gaza Strip. The indiscriminate, disproportionate attacks on the part of Israel have cost the lives of hundreds of Palestinians, including whole families and numerous children. The international community cannot stand aside in the view of this situation. It is truly important for the question of Palestine to be addressed in the United Nations system above and beyond formal debates which exist to discuss this. And when there are serious situations occurring which so deserve, the international community must speak out. And this topic must be considered as a priority for the United Nations system. We reaffirm our full support to what has been mentioned on numerous occasions and reaffirmed here today regarding Palestine becoming a full member of this organization. And we also call upon the Security Council to pronounce itself in this direction. The General Assembly of the United Nations otherwise should act decisively in order to make a decision on this point. Regarding the presentation of Ms. Gréta Gunnarsdottir, my delegation believes that there is no doubt that for the millions of Palestinian refugees registered in UNRWA, this truly represents a hope for them. The lack of a political resolution to the conflict alongside the serious financial situation faced by the agency are motives for great concern. and desperation. We're pleased to see the work being done on the ground, and tribute must be paid to the agency for this. Cuba believes that they have been able to do a lot with a little. The attempts by the greatest contributor to the agency to stop its existence have failed. And we believe they are doing commendable work and will continue this for a long time. We now must deploy every possible effort to ensure that this effort does continue. We must renew the mandate this year in 2023, and you can count, of course, upon Cuba's full support for this. We also call upon member states of the UN to show greater firm political will so as to guarantee sufficient, predictable, sustained financing so that UNRWA's work can continue contributing on the ground as it has been thus far. Thank you very much, Chair.
I thank the distinguished colleague from Cuba for her statement, and I now recognize the distinguished colleague from Malaysia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both briefers for your presentation today. At the outset, my delegation wishes to express its support for the adoption of the draft annual report of the committee as reflected in document A/77/35. I wish to reaffirm Malaysia's unequivocal support to the Palestinian people for their inalienable rights based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Malaysia, as a member of this committee, will continue to highlight the human rights violation of Israel against Palestinians, including its apartheid policies. We will also continue urging all member states to respect and implement the Security Council Resolution 2334. We will unequivocally support the full membership of the State of Palestine in the UN. I also wish to reaffirm Malaysia's support and commitment to the work and mandate of UNRWA, including through our predictable and long-term financial contribution to this agency. Let me conclude by reiterating my PR's call in the last committee's meeting, in which he called the committee members to strengthen their solidarity and unity in supporting the Palestinian people in realizing their inalienable rights to self-determination, freedom, and independence. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished colleague from Malaysia for their statement and also for reiterating a commitment from all the speakers so far towards the work of UNRWA and the Palestinian people. I now recognize the distinguished colleague from Turkey. You have the floor, Turkey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We appreciate and support the active work of the committee under the able leadership of the distinguished members of the Bureau. We thank Ambassador Feda of Palestine for the update she provided on the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. As the recent escalation last month demonstrated once again, the status quo is unsustainable. We, as Turkey, strongly condemn the airstrikes carried out by Israel on Gaza on August 5th, which resulted in the loss of civilian lives, including children, as well as the raids against Al-Aqsa Mosque, provocative acts, which constitute a clear violation of the status quo in Al-Haram al-Sharif and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and such acts targeting the status and sanctity of Al-Haram al-Sharif must not be allowed. Last week, we were honored to host President Mahmoud Abbas, who paid an official visit to Turkey. On that occasion, President Erdogan reiterated Turkey's solidarity with the Palestinian people, as well as our strongest support for the Palestinian cause. We continue to advocate the two-state solution on every platform, and we are ready to extend full support to Palestine's full membership to the United Nations as well. We also thank Ms. Gréta Gunnarsdottir, Director of UNRWRA office in New York, for her briefing. As a member of UNRWA's Advisory Commission and chair of the Working Group on the Financing of UNRWA since their establishment, Turkey is a strong supporter of the agency's mandate and lifeline work. International community has a responsibility to match the strong political support to UNRWA with sufficient, sustained and predictable funding for the agency. On our part, we'll continue our strong political and financial support. Yet another projected funding gap of around $100 million, as we have heard during the briefing as well, is extremely concerning. We strongly encourage all to fulfill their pledges and provide financial support to the agency. And obviously, Turkey will strongly support the renewal of the UNRWA mandate by the UN General Assembly this fall. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished colleague from Turkey, if I've had the pronunciation for the first time correct today. Thank you for your statement and for the support expressed. I would like now to give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
Mr. Chair, I thank you for convening today's meeting and thank Ambassador Abdelhadi and Ms. Gréta Gunnarsdottir on behalf of UNRWA for their briefings. For the past months, the volatile situation in the OPT has been pulling at the heartstrings of the whole world. The conflict in Gaza led to hundreds of civilian casualties and massive infrastructure damage, once again pushing the situation to the brink of war. We appreciate Egypt, Qatar, Jordan, and other regional countries, as well as Special Coordinator Wennesland for their mediation and for brokering a ceasefire. At the initiative of the UAE, China, and other Security Council members, the Council held an emergency meeting on the situation in Gaza on August 8th, at which member states called on all parties concerned to effectively observe the ceasefire and restore full calm to Gaza as soon as possible. During the conflict, UNRWA and other humanitarian agencies have overcome many difficulties to actively carry out humanitarian operations and provided emergency relief and aid to the people in Gaza. Last week, UNRWA Commissioner General Lazzarini was invited to make a briefing at the Security Council open debate on the Palestinian question. In recent years, time and again, the agency has been sounding the alarm of a fiscal crisis, which demonstrates that the situation in the OPT is worsening. The number and humanitarian needs of the Palestinian refugees are on the rise, while the international community's attention and investments are on the decline, which points to a worrying situation. We call for full political support, as well as adequate, predictable, and sustainable financial support for the agency. The Palestinian question cannot be further delayed or marginalized. Efforts must be made to resolve the issue for the long term based on the two-state solution. We call on Israel to immediately cease settlement activities in the OPT, effectively fulfill its humanitarian obligations, and return to the right track of the two-state solution as soon as possible. We urge countries with significant influence on the issue to take an objective and impartial stand and to make tangible efforts to advance the peace process. We hope that the Council will act proactively with a greater sense of urgency to resolve the issue. We support the resumption of peace talks between the two sides to negotiate a settlement on all the final status issues, including those concerning Palestinian refugees. China is ready to work with the international community to practice true multilateralism, promote the restoration of the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, and push for a comprehensive, just, and durable solution to the Palestinian question so as to attain lasting peace in the Middle East at an early date. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of China for his statement and for reminding us that the question of Palestine cannot be further delayed, also for putting emphasis on the fiscal crisis facing question in Palestine, particularly the work of UNRWA. I now recognize the Ambassador of Sri Lanka. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for giving me the floor for the second time. But I thought it was very compelling, having listened to Ambassador Feda of Palestine, to reconfirm in no uncertain terms that the picture emerging from the Gaza Strip is increasingly bleak, with the population deprived of access to adequate health care, employment, basic services such as water and electricity, and freedom of movement. The blockade has affected every area of Palestinian life, including well-being, health, education, livelihood, and environment. The dire situation, if I was to describe it in Gaza, is a man-made humanitarian catastrophe, maintained and perpetuated by deliberate policies and practices designed to control a trapped population. The special committee in which I was intends to urge the international community to shift its focus from humanitarian emergency to addressing the root causes of the catastrophe, including ending the blockade and the border closures. Thank you.
I thank Ambassador of Sri Lanka for his contribution to this serious discussion this morning and for highlighting again that the picture from Gaza is increasingly bleak and we need to do something and needs to be done now. I recognize the distinguished representative of South Africa.
We wish first to thank you and all the members of the Bureau for the work that you are doing and for convening us today. We also would like to congratulate the Director for UNRWRA in New York as well as Ambassador Fida for their briefings this morning. For South Africa, UNRWRA continues to do very remarkable work. It has got very laudable achievements under extreme conditions, which we also heard about this morning. At the same time, we had these very disturbing reports that the situation of UNRWRA is rather untenable financially and to some extent politically as well. And this stands to reverse the gains which have been made over the years. And in terms of the situation on the ground in Palestine, for South Africa, this situation clearly resembles the system of apartheid, which we experienced in our own country. And we stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. I can report here that last week our Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation visited Palestine for the second South Africa-Palestine strategic dialogue as a sign of our enduring commitment to support the liberation and self-determination of the Palestinian people. South Africa will therefore support the mandate renewal of UNRWRA. We urge that this committee should collectively push for this. Let us see what is it that we can do together as a committee to advance this mandate renewal. The Director has also shared with us this morning the story of success of UNRWRA in human development. Some of the examples that she gave us show the potential that an independent state of Palestine will have. In Palestine, we see a story of resilience, the story of resilient human beings who are able to achieve so much under these very difficult circumstances. We therefore also support, as our second main point today, the need for sustainable financing of UNRWRA. We believe that this committee should take up this matter with urgency and bring it to the rest of the membership of the UN. This is again another area where we can work collectively together. Lastly, Mr. Chair, we agree with the permanent representative of Indonesia and other colleagues that eventually what is required is a political solution based on the international agreed parameters under international law. We must state, however, our worry that the continued escalation of violence against the Palestinians, as well as their deprivation, will increasingly diminish the idea of a two-state solution, and this is in no one's interest. Therefore, a political will is needed in this regard, and this committee has a very important role to play. Let us see what is it that we can do further beyond just making statements. Let us come up with strategies that we can work on as a collective to advance the cause of a two-state solution. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa for his statement and for highlighting the absolute need for us to preserve the two-state solution amongst other points raised. Ambassador of South Africa, thank you also for expressing your full appreciation for the work of UNRWA. I now recognize the distinguished representative of Egypt. Egypt, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank you and the delegation of Palestine and the director of UNRWA for their briefings this morning. We reiterate our concern regarding the current situation and circumstances in the occupied Palestinian territory. We've seen recent escalations in Gaza, and Egypt, along with some brotherly Arab nations and other parties in the United States, have been acting to bring about a ceasefire and will continue these efforts so that the ceasefire continues and that circumstances on the ground improve, particularly through projects which we are leading directly in Gaza. We also subscribe to and echo previous speakers in expressing our support for UNRWA and the need for sustainable financing. Of course, we reaffirm the importance of renewing UNRWA's mandate at the end of this year without any changes to this mandate. It is also necessary for the committee to look at the available options for supporting this renewal in coordination with the Palestinian delegation to support the renewal and to mobilize support for it. As soon as possible. I, of course, reiterate Egypt's support for the efforts of the committee to this end. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished colleague from Egypt for his statement and for highlighting again support for UNRWA and the need for sustainable financing. And also I appreciate the expression of your support already for the renewal, for the support of the mandate renewal. This committee will need to continue to work with other member states as we come up in November towards the discussion on the renewal of the mandate. I recognize the distinguished representative for Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. والشكر موصول.
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to thank the Ambassador for Palestine and the representative of UNRWA. We thank you for the enlightening briefings on the circumstances in occupied territory and the challenges faced by the Palestinian people. Chair, the question of Palestine remains central for Syria. We are sparing no efforts in standing at the side of our Palestinian brothers in their struggle to recover their territory and legitimate rights. All their rights, particularly the right of establishing their sovereign state on their territory with Jerusalem as the capital. Palestine must also be a full member of the United Nations, that Palestinian refugees have the right to return home under international law and relevant resolutions of the United Nations, in particular Resolution 194. Chair, over the decades, Syria has hosted Palestinian refugees and provide them all the means of subsistence necessary. However, the difficult situations in Syria, particularly because of the measures imposed against my country, have meant that our capacity to respond to the needs of Palestinian refugees and citizens have decreased, particularly because terrorism has demolished our infrastructure and in important sectors, particularly in Palestinian camps, which must be repaired and replaced, as Ms. Gunnarsdottir was explaining in her briefing. Chair, the responsibility for preserving UNRWA's mandate is a shared collective one. The rights of refugees are inalienable and must stand. Despite adversity and aggression against UNRWA with a view to trying to torpedo these rights, Syria insists the need for UNRWA to continue functioning and serving all Palestinian refugees. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished colleague from the Syrian Arab Republic, and I want to also thank her for highlighting, in particular, support for full membership status of Palestine in the UN, amongst other important statements that you have shared with us. I recognize now the distinguished representative of Lebanon.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you also to the Director of UNRWA in New York for her briefing. I would also like to thank Ambassador Fida for her contribution. I thank also all ambassadors and colleagues. I would also like to express Lebanon's concern regarding the financial crisis faced by UNRWA. Lebanon calls for sustainable resources to be found to support UNRWA's budget this year, but also in the future in a predictable way. We stress UNRWA's role as a life saver for Palestinian refugees, whether in the camps in Palestine or in countries welcoming refugees, including my country, Lebanon. UNRWA is a necessary, vital tool for stability in the region. Therefore, UNRWA must be able to implement its mandate with no breaks in that implementation. Thank you, Chair, for listening.
I thank our distinguished colleague from Lebanon for his expression of support to the work of Lebanon and for the statement of UNRWA and for the work of the committee. Colleagues, I see no further requests for the floor. I would now like to ask Ms. Gunnarsdottir if she wishes to respond to any of the comments she's heard before we close the discussion on this agenda item. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank you all that took the floor for your very strong expression of support for UNRWA. And it's good to have such a backup going into the incoming General Assembly. And also, I think the discussion reflected also a deep understanding for the seriousness of the situation of UNRWA when it comes to especially finances, as well as the situation on the ground. And I would just thank you again, Mr. Chair, and the committee for inviting us to come here and give you the overview of the situation of the agency and for the Palestine refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gunnarsdottir. We thank you for participating in our meeting this morning, and we wish you all the best with the work of your important agency. We wish for good success in everything that you do for the people of Palestine in this situation. Colleagues, we will now break for a minute just to allow Ms. Gunnarsdottir to leave the room, as she has to attend to other meetings, and then we will resume with the next item on our agenda. So I am presenting to you agenda item 4, the consideration and the adoption of draft annual report of the Committee to the General Assembly, document A/77/35. The committee is requested to consider and adopt the draft annual report of the committee for submission to the General Assembly at its 77th session. A copy of the draft was circulated by the Division of Palestinian Rights ahead of today's meeting. We will go chapter by chapter to ensure the Secretariat can take down any potential comments. Before doing so, I would like to give the floor to delegations that wish to make comments of a general nature on the report. Do I see any requests for the floor? Well, if there are no comments, we will now move to the consideration and adoption of the draft report, chapter by chapter. Let us begin with chapters 1 and 2, introduction and overview of the political context relating to the question of Palestine. Are there any comments on these first 2 chapters? I'm happy to see the report has been well drafted, so I see no request for the floor. If there are no comments on chapters 1 and 2, I take it that the committee approves chapters 1 and 2. It is so decided. Chapters 3, 4, and 5, heading Mandate of the Committee, Organization of Work, and Action taken by the Committee and the Division for Palestinian Rights. Are there any comments in this section? Nicaragua seems quite happy with those sections, so I take it that there are no further comments, and I take it that the committee approves chapters 3, 4, and 5. It is so decided. Chapter 6, action taken by the Department of Global Communications in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 75/23. Are there any comments? If there are no comments, may I take it that the committee approves Chapter 6? It is so decided. And then Chapter 7, conclusions and recommendations of the committee. Are there any comments? I see none. I will take it that the committee decides to approve Chapter 7. It is so decided. We have thus concluded the consideration of the draft 2022 annual report. If there are no other comments, may I take it that the committee wishes to adopt the draft annual report of the committee for submission to the General Assembly? It is so decided. I would like to take this moment to request all governments and organizations to continue to extend their full cooperation and support to the committee in the performance of its tasks, particularly in implementing the recommendations of the report just adopted, and to continue to support, in line with the UN resolutions, the Palestinian people in the realization of their right to self-determination. The two-state solution in which Israel and Palestine live side by side peacefully, and in which the state of Palestine emerges sovereign and independent based on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, remains the only viable option for a just and peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine. In accordance with the established practice, the adopted report will be transmitted to the Secretary General for submission to the General Assembly. The report is scheduled to be presented to the 77th session of the GA during its consideration of the question of Palestine on 30 November 2022. I now move on to Agenda Item 5 for an update on activities of the committee. As you can see, I am filling in for the chair of the committee, Ambassador Nyang of Senegal, and the following is a report submitted by Ambassador Nyang for the committee's information. Since its last meeting in July, the committee conducted a number of activities as per its program of work and supported by the Division of Palestinian Rights, and which are outlined in the committee's annual report. On 20 July, the committee co-organized its annual conference on the question of Jerusalem titled, and I quote, Palestinian Youth in East Jerusalem Under Occupation, close quote. We organized that with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, where an OIC representative from Jeddah and the president of the 75th General Assembly delivered statements. The PGA delivered statement via video. The conference was live-streamed on UN Web TV and via social media platforms for maximum global dissemination. The video and all documentation related to the event are available on the committee's website, un.org/UNISPAL. In July, our chair, Ambassador Nyang, traveled to Amman in Jordan to open the two-day communication strategy workshop held on 25 and 26 July. The workshop gathered 21 officials of the government of Palestine and equipped participants with skills to develop a full suite of strategic communication tools to help the government of Palestine communicate and engage with their audiences more effectively. While in Jordan on 25 July, Ambassador Nyang met with Mr. Mohammed Hindawi, the director of the Negotiations Coordination Bureau at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to express the committee's gratitude for Jordan's support for the rights of the Palestinian people and to discuss Jordan's support for UNRWA. Additionally, Ambassador Nyang met with Mr. Ghulam Ishaq Sai, acting UN Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator in Jordan, to update him on committee activities, including the Strategic Communications Workshop. On 4th of August, the Bureau met with the PR of Albania, and on 25 August, the Bureau met with the Secretary General to express deep concern that amid other pressing global issues and conflicts, the international community has shifted its focus from the question of Palestine. We also conveyed our worry at the erosion of the two-state solution as Israel continues to expand settlements, confiscate and demolish Palestinian homes and structures, and transfer its population to the OPT with the stated intent to change its demography. The Secretary General assured the Bureau the question of Palestine and the MEPP remain a priority on the UN agenda and commended the committee's principled positions and advocacy in support of Palestinian rights. Finally, This year's commemoration of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People will be held on 29 November and will be followed on 30 November by the plenary session of the General Assembly on the question of Palestine, which will also consider the 4 resolutions on the question of Palestine, including the 3 resolutions that were biennialized in 2020. So I remind you that the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian People will be held on 29 November, and we will meet in the plenary on the 30th of November for the plenary session on the question of Palestine. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am looking around the room to see if there are requests for the floor on any other matters. I see none, and I want to thank you all for your time this morning to be with us and for your solidarity expressed in all your input to this meeting, to the work of UNRWA and the Palestinian people. And I now adjourn this meeting, and I look forward to seeing you on the 29th of November. Thank you.